I'd like to start off today's conversation with a meditation. If you're able to, go ahead and find a place to sit down. And if you can do this, once you're sitting down, go ahead and close your eyes. And take a moment to go a little inwardly and pay attention to your awareness. And as you do this, imagine with me a space. Pretend you're inside of a beautiful room. It has nicely finished wood floors. The walls are a beautiful color. It has big windows letting light in from the outside. Maybe there's a sunset outdoors. It's summer. There are birds. There's no city noise. There's no traffic. It's very calm. You're out somewhere in the country, maybe. The room you're inside of isn't too hot. It's not too cold. And you notice a chair in the center of the room. And you're instructed by somebody, an attendant that's at the door of this room, to go ahead and sit in the chair. And you go sit. You're kind of noticing the beauty of the space. It feels very pleasant. And then you're instructed just to pay attention to what is present. What is going on for yourself in the moment? And as you do this, you sort of notice this mystery that's going on in the background. A sort of question about what is this self? Who am I? Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes. Let's come out of that for a bit. Now consider with me that this mystery, this moment in that exercise that we were noticing, it actually happens quite frequently within our day. Consider maybe your morning beverage, coffee, tea, water, milk, whatever it is. You know, I can imagine this moment where you take a sip out of your glass and you look at it back on the table and you notice the swirling patterns within the liquid, the bubbles in there, a sort of infinity that's contained within that glass that calls us forward, saying, I know this old mystery. Something about this is so compelling. Or maybe you're at your parents' house and you walk by an old photograph of yourself from when you were a child. And this photograph, it catches your eye and you notice for a second the gap between who you were and who you are. And it pulls you again, saying, what is this self? Who am I? What is this process, this life? And this can happen in many different ways in our existence. Even in small ways, I can imagine, say, being at work, writing an email, and suddenly you notice the patterns on the screen, the small little pixels that make up the experience. And again, it kind of calls us forward to say, what is going on here? What is this self? What is this reality we inhabit? And noticing how our inner sense of self shifts depending on the mood, the place, the context, and all these things. Now I'd like to juxtapose this idea, this mystery, with a different frame. Maybe this is the more popular frame, I would say, in a way. And this is the frame of the self as a fixed object, not as a mystery. And I'd like to have us explore these kind of cultural assumptions that we often encounter, that I am who I am, or I need to discover my true self, or there's a real me out there somewhere waiting, as if I got all the pieces in the right shape, we took all the Tetris blocks of our existence and aligned them just perfectly, that would make us perfect, that buying a new car, or the perfect house, or the perfect job, or the perfect partner, or the perfect personality, or whatever it would be, that's going to somehow make it okay. And how this view of the self as a fixed object, it's as if the self could be a noun, a thing that can be contained, or that it's stable, that we can somehow make it into some shape, and then it's just perfect, and that's just how it's going to be. Or that if we had the perfect personality type, it would somehow make the whole situation okay. Or if we had to say a certain set of traits, if our identity was perfectly constructed to be the perfect thing the culture wants right in the moment. That somehow, yes, I've arrived. I am the perfect version of myself in every possible way. But I would like to suggest that this rigidity, this grasping towards objects to make ourselves fit into those shapes, that this creates a kind of suffering. And it's a suffering that most of us know quietly within us. And often it's this kind of suffering that calls us towards therapeutic work. In this rigidity, we want to find a way out of it. We want to be more than just those objects of our existence. We want to be more than just the things we identify as, that we want to broaden our awareness. We want something underneath it, something deeper that calls us inward to a kind of solid sense of being that's not so nailed down. I'd like to suggest a sort of existential reframe here, that the self is not fixed, but is a process. And the core idea here is that the self isn't something we have. It is something we do. It's something we enact. It's something that unfolds moment by moment. The existential philosopher Sartre, he says this line very famously, that existence precedes essence. Now, what does he mean by this? He's meaning that the kind of substrate of our existence, the causes and conditions of a reality, and the beingness within it, that existence, it precedes the essence of who we are, that our context actually is shaping our reality. It's not that the things we grab onto shape it. Another way we could put this could be from phenomenology. Existential thinker like Martin Heidegger might say that the self is a lived experience, that the self is an active process, that consciousness as we experience it is a identifiable thing that has its own sort of quality and flow and experience, and that phenomenological basis for understanding ourselves is really what is the most important thing. And within that phenomenology, there's going to be an incredible kind of fluidity that emerges, because what you find is that the self is never fixed. Another frame we might look at this is by examining a term called enactivism. This is a philosophy that's deeply ecological. And it says really that our environment shapes who we are. That's the simple way to put it. To put it in more concrete terms, I'll give you an example. Orchids are beautiful flowers. They have intricate patterns on them. They have intricate shapes, and they're very interesting to look at. There's a lot of variety of orchids. But the thing about orchids that's so fascinating is that their shape actually is determined by the bug that pollinates them. They're completely interconnected with that insect. And actually the insect is interconnected with them. And the two things kind of merge together as one to both survive. They're symbiotic in a sense. And their shapes have emerged through a deep ecological context that is just countless generations old. And just like orchids and these insects kind of being connected, the self also is connected back to its environment, that who we are is deeply ecological. The bodies, the minds, the identities, the personalities, et cetera, that we inhabit are really reflections of our environmental conditions. Another way to think about the self as a process is through the frame that I really work in very actively, which is this existential humanistic frame. And that's seeing that the self is an emergent process, and that authenticity is really the guide there to that emergent process. And as we are more authentic, that authenticity can emerge and guide that process, and discover that our true identity, our real identity underneath all the kind of images we hold in representations is not fixed. It is incredibly dynamic. It's relational. It's alive. Now within this, there's another layer to explore, which is what I would call the multiplicity of the self. That the self has different sort of perspectives that we can hold within it. Think of yourself at work, And think of who you are at work alone versus around your boss. Or think about who you are around your partner, or who you are when you fall asleep at night. Think about who you are maybe in a moment of crisis or difficulty. What is the self when you're deeply anxious or depressed? What is the self when you're filled with joy or happiness? What is the quiet, introspective self that we started this talk with? And who is that? And this isn't about pathologizing any of this or sort of calling out that it's a problem. Actually, it's quite the opposite. And in my view, this kind of multiplicity of experience is profoundly normal. And in fact, healthy. It's very human. And I think that the more that we're in contact with these different kind of perspectives on our existence, the more we can authentically become engaged in the process of living our full life. Now, therapeutically, I'd just like to highlight that my experience has been that clients often come to me with this question of not really knowing who they are. And what I mean by that is they're not usually saying that directly, although sometimes they may. It's mostly indirect, and what they are saying are things like, my life's not working. All these pieces, they don't fit together. I've done all the right things, or I've made all the right choices, but still underneath it, there's something really, really wrong going on. It feels dreadful, or whatever the feeling is. It's a real difficulty. And that what I hear in between all their words often is this kind of sense that they don't know who they really, truly are. That all the things they've grabbed onto, all the objects, didn't quite work. And so there's this deeper question about who is really the authentic self? What is that mystery really about? And it's been my experience as well that this question really comes usually at a time in their life when they're encountering sort of the complexity of experience in their own identity for the first time. That really when we start to see that we can't follow such an easy prescriptive narrative, things start to break down, and that all that leaves a kind of space to consider, what is this life really about? What is underneath all this? Now let's shift gears a little bit to highlight this multiplicity and these questions that I see in therapy so often. And I'd like to talk about the relationship. If you think back to being a child or even an infant, others shape us, our parents, our family, our friends. And as we get older, our coworkers, our community members, all those kinds of things really profoundly define who we are. That's that ecological piece coming back in. Another way to put this existentially is that we hear our own voice more clearly in the presence of another. And therapy is one of these rare places where we can really hear that voice reverberate really precisely, really clearly, really authentically. And in my work, this existential humanistic work is really profoundly about this process. It's about two people meeting in a space, online or in person, that is so interested in uncovering who you are right in the moment as a gateway to discovering this infinity within each of us. And that this pull of the mystery, it's such an amazing process that can reveal such a rich life that can be lived through it. One that's not bound by these limitations or sort of false constructs we get trapped in, but the real thing, the authentic thing, the alive thing. But I do want to say here that this is not necessarily so easy. That engagement with that real freedom we have, that choice we have to make our life in a different way, it comes with some costs that we have to work through to get to the other side. Now, I think these costs, quote unquote, are really worth it. And they're actually not really costs in the long run. They're trade-offs that reveal a much richer life. But nonetheless, as we move towards this more authentic way of being, it really challenges us because we have to learn that we are not fixed, that we're always in motion, And this motion, it comes with freedom to move and act and change. But because of that freedom, there's also an anxiety underneath that. Now, what do I mean here? Let's take a pause for a second and consider a story. So imagine that a client has come to see me, and they're a high-powered business person. I don't know what business they're in, but they've really driven their life towards profit. And they've done this at the expense of everything in their life. Everything. They just are completely invested in making money. And they're coming to me because their life is falling apart. Their marriage is failing, relationships are failing, business associates don't like them, they have maybe some substance abuse problem, and so on and so forth. And what the work becomes is really this deepening awareness of their life, and then helping them discern who they want to be in the world. And they realize maybe along the way that they want to change sort of the interior structure of who they are to be better aligned and kind of have a more sustainable life that's not so standoffish with the rest of their experience. But in that process, they realize they have to confront those deep fears that drove them in the first place to drive so hard into work. And that's going to be very anxiety-provoking, because you're going to have to do the hard work of being in relationship with what is so difficult. And this can be so profoundly liberating for people, so liberating, and yet it's also unsettling. But if you work through that unsettledness, that difficulty, that anxiety that's within change, there is a profound opening on the other side where you can be a much more less bounded version of yourself, a much more alive version, a much more free version. And how our identity, ultimately, it's both a possibility and also, in a certain way, a responsibility back to the kind of deep ecological context of our lives. Really, in a way, what I'm talking about here is alignment. How can we align ourselves with our existence? And through that alignment, what is the outcome? And in my experience, therapeutically, the outcome is usually very positive. Now, if we think about ourselves in this context, and about our own lives, our own freedom, our own choices to change, I just want to normalize that feeling like this, that like you're almost a stranger to yourself, or sensing there's a gap between who you are and who you want to be, or say if this is happening at a very difficult time in your life, grief, a big relationship change, a career change, a health issue, all these things can really rewrite who we are, can change our identity. And there is a profound discomfort in not having a kind of consistent story we can hang on to make it all okay, to make the anxiety palatable. But I just want to suggest here really, really honestly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, that these questions about identity, about who we are, they're not failures. That just because you feel this real difficulty around grief doesn't mean you failed, or that because your relationship is changing, or whatever it is, whatever story is going on in your life right now, they're not a failure. It's not a failure. That this is an invitation to opening. It's an invitation to greater insight into the self, into our awareness. And really that is the path itself. That right there, that difficulty is the mystery, and walking along it is the path. So within this sort of path that emerges, this way forward, I'd like to call it the self as attaining. And what do I mean here? Kind of circling around it already, but that our identity forms when we place our attention on it, and noticing the qualities that feel most alive to us, that really helps direct it. And as we do this, we listen inwardly to what draws us, what troubles us, what's calling us forward. And we allow, with space, with graciousness, with care, our identity to unfold inside of us, to help it take shape into the world. And this really is the groundwork of the existential humanistic path. that through awareness, through considering the context of our life really deeply with the supportive presence of another, that we can become more fully who we are. We can attune to our experience. We can open up to it and live this more vibrant, beautiful, and alive version of ourselves. So in closing, I'd like to just suggest here that our identity, who we are in the world, it can be something that really guides us. And the thing is that you don't need to know who exactly you are. You don't really need to know who you are at all. And actually that mystery, that question, like sitting in the chair in that room in the opening exercise, who is this self? It can be a guide. You don't have to know. All you have to do is listen. Listen carefully and deeply to what's alive in us, what feels true, and what's becoming.